party as well as towards the outcome. So that's going to be something we're going to touch on, a couple more skills that you can use with that. But let me go to active listening here, which is just, I'm skipping around here. I like to skip around because a lot of this has to do with some of the listening skills that are popularly talked about in our culture. I mean, active listening is not something that you've not heard before. So let's quickly make a list and just tie it in here of what things are good listening and what things are bad listening.
Eye contact.
Eye contact.
Stopping someone when you don't understand.
Stopping by doing
Well,
what?
giving back what you think they said and making sure it's
So
right.
like
or
reflecting and clarifying.
seeking clarification.
Confirming. Confirming your understanding. What are some bad things? Interrupting. Now, some of this stuff may be interrupting, but interrupting, what would be some things that you would do when interrupting that would distinguish a bad interruption from a good interruption?
Change the topic.
Change the topic?
No,
Sort of,
no, I meant that.
right, yeah,
Okay.
sort of in a disruptive way.
Very
Uh,
boring.
A non-believing.
Looking at the other party while one is talking and suddenly turn around and look at the other.
Okay, so we got, I think, skeptical maybe, is that? Skeptical, and
Just looking, ignoring.
ignoring. Have you ever sat down to start telling someone something, like, and they say to you, well, why'd you do that? Or, I've told you not to do that, or, that was a silly thing to do. I'll call this judging. Yes.
Do you want things happening in our heads like when we sort of jump ahead and say, oh, they're going to say this, or oh, that, you know, reaching
Finishing the
conclusion.
sentence?
That, even though we're doing it in our heads, that's the worst listening I
Dad
ever
did that to
do.
you.
What?
I think
You do it.
Attentive. For some reason, my spelling, I'm just really conscious right now. I think a good thing would be attentive silence, and a bad thing would be finishing a person's thought. I do that all the time. We are not all the best listeners all the time, and that's because it's almost impossible, I think, to employ all these good listening skills all the time. I mean, have you ever been in an environment where someone comes in to talk to you and you just have to find that one piece of paper and you're shuffling through your papers and they're talking to you and then the phone rings and you pick up the phone? That is not an environment where you're really establishing a lot of good rapport. And while I'm not saying that active listening is something we do all the time, because I think that would be impossible, I've heard you talk about the importance of getting that listening out and having people feel heard within the mediation process. And that's a lot of what this is going to do. That good eye contact, that good body language, those what we call attending skills, nodding, nonverbal cues that we give to people that they're listening. All of that stuff will make people feel heard. But there's another side to listening that I think we don't often focus on with active listening. We think that doing all this stuff will make the person talking feel good. If I nod and smile and ask good questions of Susan, she'll feel better. And then I've done my good job as an active listener. But the flip side of that is that if I listen well, Susan's going to do a better job of telling me a story, telling me the information, sharing with me what she came to share. So doing a good job of listening means better information gets on the table. And that's what I think becomes really essential in this process. And if you're the person who's gone in to tell someone a story and they're flipping through papers and picking up the phone and interrupting you to ask about a project you didn't come in to talk about, how hard it can be to sometimes get your message across. And I don't know if anyone's ever been on one side or the other, for example, of reading a newspaper. This is a common, you see it in comic strips, and a person saying, "You're not listening." And the other person says, "Well, yes, I am. I can tell you everything that you said." But the person trying to tell the story was so frustrated that they didn't do a very good job of relaying the information. And that's what's critical here. You want to get that good information on the table, and good listening is going to help you do that. Now, one of the things we have a couple of different pieces here: reflecting, clarifying, confirming. All this, what we're going to put under the bigger rubric of summarizing. How to let people know that we heard, check our own information, and begin to distill out some of maybe the little bit of hostile language that we got going on. So, let's skip from listening here down to summarizing, because I think those things are connected in terms of listening. Now, when in the process must you summarize? Okay, before you write an agreement, probably.
After their initial statements.
After their initial statements. Absolutely must summarize. So, that is one time in this process when you're going to definitely use summarization. Now, before concluding is another time. Other times that you think it might be important.
After identifying the issues.
After identifying the issues. Before going to caucus. Can be a time to sort of clarify where we are. But you're going to hear a lot of words being used, and we listed up some words here that go along with the same mission of summarizing, reflecting, and restating. So I just want to put those out there because in our training, they get used a lot in a lot of different ways. And I think that they mean slightly different things. That summarization is the general category that we're going to talk about. And I used to say I never met a summarization I didn't like. But I think I said that so often and so emphatic that I started to meet a few I didn't like. That people started to summarize a little too much. I think that the new mediator, though, does tend to under-summarize. Because they think everything's so obvious. I mean, I was here, she was here, we both heard it. I don't need to go over that again. But you don't realize the power of having a person hear those words back and having you, because in that summarization you are distilling out a few things. You're trying to not just repeat the words you heard, but what you heard is important. And there's a lot of power in that. So let's think of the summarization as the bigger thing that happens, like after that initial statement. You're not just saying, okay, so the bottom line is this. Those initial statements, okay, so you've known each other for several years. Last week at a party, there was an incident. There was a discussion that didn't go well. You followed each other outside. This happened, this happened, this happened. Kind of the big picture. Well, now every time you want to summarize something, you certainly don't want to go back to the beginning of the story, do you? And summarize up to that point. If some new information comes out on the table, you don't have to go to the very beginning of what was said and summarize up to that point. And that's where you start to break it down into smaller pieces. The kind of reflecting and restating maybe just a small statement that was said. And I know Brad and I do this a lot when we train. Someone will say, well, it seems like the mediator was ignoring the importance of that issue. Okay, so you felt the issue was being ignored. That's a little restate. Just one or two sentences that were said, the mediator is sort of turning it around and sending it back to the person, putting it out there. What I really don't understand is why he had to do that. Okay, so it sounds like you want some more information about that. What's important to you about that? Sounds like you were concerned when that happened. Just little restates. Reflecting, I think that reflecting and restating often get interchanged, but for this, let's think of reflecting as something that we do with emotions. Reflecting or acknowledging emotions. Holding up a mirror when you hear an emotion come out. Now, in this mediation, we have to be neutral. We don't want to judge or value what's going on. And someone gets upset or angry or frustrated, if we tell a party that we perfectly understand why that happened or we agree with why that happened, then we're going to get in the way of being neutral. So what we want to do is sort of hold up a mirror and reflect that. You know, seems like this has made you very angry. I'm hearing that this has made you very angry. Looks like this is something which has really upset you. If you say something like, I really understand what it's like to have a friend do that to you, okay? Even if you do it in caucus, because what might happen in joint session?
You said that you understood.
Yes, yes. So these listening skills are really drawing out your ability to hear what's being said, but not buy into it. And that's where this reflecting or acknowledging emotions comes in. I've really seen it happen where a party is way up there, escalated, yelling and screaming, and you say, obviously, Mr. Jones, this has made you very angry. Just come way down. A lot of people are telling you where they're at to make sure that you got it. And once you've got it, they don't need to keep advertising anymore. So if you hear emotions, let parties know that you hear it. And you don't even have to do it in this way that's just, okay, you're very angry. Now, how much did you want for that car? You can really reflect back that emotion. You're very angry, you expected something different to happen when this did happen. You didn't know how to feel, and this is a person you consider your friend, and at this point, this has really upset you. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Let's talk more about that. If you ignore the emotions, then parties are not going to be able to get beyond to deal with the other stuff. And that's what goes into listening. Imagine a person who starts talking about, you don't understand. This has been the most frustrating situation. I've missed 2 days of work. My husband's starting to get angry with me because, I haven't resolved the situation. It's costing us money. I don't know what to do about it. It's just been a real confusing part of my life right now. And if the mediator says, well, how much damage are you willing to pay for then? Yeah. The party, that may not be an issue which is there to be resolved, but the party's going to feel like you haven't heard a thing. So you've got to reflect and hear that and restate that. Okay. Questions about this? I've kind of thrown a lot out there.
You say, I know, I acknowledge,
I hear how angry you are. It sounds like you're very angry. It seems that this has made you very angry.
and that might trigger even a more hostile response. I mean, possible.
It is
If
possible.
the person goes, what do you mean? You sense that I'm angry. What do you think I've been saying all this time?
Well, I just want to make sure that I understand where you're coming from on this, and what I'm getting is that this has made you really angry. We have a lot of experience in the audience here. Other experiences that people have had to trying to walk that line between acknowledging emotions without buying into it.
I was just going to say, it's very difficult to do, even if you've been trained in it, but oftentimes I was in a situation once where I was trying to do this active listening, and I did similar to what you said. So from your perspective, it sounds like the guy came back with, you're damn right, and this is how I feel, but I continued to actively listen to that, and then it seems like with that second real strong emotion came that psychological release, if you will, that okay, I needed to get that all out. So it can be difficult and quite challenging.
It definitely, and I think that this is something, after about 4 years of doing this, I've been able to start to incorporate in other settings besides mediation when I don't know anyone. And try it someday when someone walks up to you and they say, I can't believe you took the car. I needed the car. I told you I was going to need the car after work today. How many times did I have to say it? And you're saying, okay, so you're angry because you expected to have the car and you felt that I misunderstood that, and now that's caused some problems for you. Yes. And then you can be like, well, I disagree with that, but all of a sudden you see, people get almost sometimes more frustrated because now they don't have anywhere to go because you just heard everything that they had to say. And if you do continue to discuss it, you know that people aren't discussing it based on misinformation because you've told the person, this is where I hear you're at. Let me make sure I'm right before I go forward. Okay, I want to move to a different topic, and I'm just going to ask in sort of a cloaked way to see, because I have an exercise and I want to see if anyone's done it before. Has anyone ever experienced the ugly orange exercise? Okay, I wanted to ask it in a sort of cloaked way because I didn't want to give too much away. Well, that's good then. I want you to be working with someone you haven't been sitting next to. So there's 2 roles in here, one for Dr. Rowland and one for Dr. Jones. And we have 14 people in here because one of our participants had to step out. So I'm going to pass out 7 Rowlands on this side and 7 Jones on that side. And why don't we sort of pair up opposite? So we can have you 2, Alvin and Marta, right? Susan and Nancy, Rosemary and Joan, Ken and Alicia, Jan and Jan, and Sue and Phyllis, because they've been sitting next to each other in the middle there. Okay, I'm going to pass this out, but I want to give you a little bit of context first. Now, this is going to be a role, a discussion of your position as a doctor in this company. Each are going to be from different companies. Now, this isn't a mediation. You're not going to be going to a mediation, but you're going to meet with your counterpart at this other organization to have a negotiation. And I know this is sort of out of the blue, and it's going to feel like you don't quite have all the information you want, but it's just going to raise some issues for us that are going to be fun to discuss, because we'll see how different people go. Just read what you have here. I'm going to open the doors and let you spread out. We have the waiting room where there was the food. We have a couple people in here, and we have 3 other mediation rooms. And I want you to spread out so that you don't hear each other's conversations. Meet your colleague, and you're going to know what your goal is in this description. You know what you want to accomplish. So meet with your colleague to negotiate over the situation. You can role play this however you want. It's just going to give us a chance to play some things out. And I said Roland's over here, did I? Doesn't matter. Okay. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And Jones, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. Why don't you get your partner and go find some space? If we could just have maybe only 2 people left in here, that would be great. And I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to play with this.
Oh, we got some chairs that we still like.
Oh, we should have brought the chair.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, let's come back together. And without talking much about the details yet, I want to ask how many people feel that they resolved this to a point where they solved their problem?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that?
How many people resolved it to a point where they solved the problem? Okay, I'll let it go on a little too long here. And the way, how was the way that you got a resolution? What solutions did you come up with?
I get the rind and she gets the juice.
Okay. Did anyone have a solution that didn't involve rind and juice?
It has to go beyond the rind and the juice, because Cardoza is holding the oranges.
Right.
And we still have to go to him to appeal to his sense of altruism, so that we will all benefit from getting the oranges.
I think we're appealing to his sense of greed, actually, going authorized.
But he could exploit us. Because he knows
But I all think that those are all essential pieces of the negotiation. But if I could, and I think that this scenario, Brad and I were talking just a second ago about ways we can rewrite it to accomplish our objectives a little bit more. What I want to focus you in on is the way that we started the negotiation and how we got to rind and juice. The last group I did this in, I had about half and half. I had about half the people that discovered that the parties wanted different parts of the orange, and about half the people who didn't get there. So there probably were a couple of different ways that this came out. Did anyone start off the negotiation by simply appealing that their scenario was more dire, or okay? Okay. So, and for some people, did the rind and the juice division just sort of come out haphazardly, like while you were talking about what you wanted, that came out?
No, we didn't even realize.
Okay, so you didn't get there for a while. So you probably didn't even, you weren't necessarily keeping that close to your chest because you thought it was some big secret, were you?
No.
No,
Okay, it just was something that you
It
didn't
come
think
We
was
didn't-
necessarily
yeah.
relevant. Okay. This scenario sets up a little bit, and maybe not distinct enough, that there's some hostility between the negotiators. Okay. And sometimes when people come in, when there's a little bit of hostility, they are simply showing why they deserve this, or why this is their right to have, more than the other person. And that's where this negotiation starts. And if there's too much hostility, there isn't a lot of collaborative problem solving. You guys are all in a mediation class, and you're probably really interested in being, collaborative. And I'm not necessarily talking collaborative in terms of the test that we did this morning, but, finding common ground. And so you all did a good job of that. But that piece was essential to whether or not each of you could get your underlying problem solved. And without discovering that piece, that you both could use a different part of the orange, you would have been fighting over a limited quantity of things and not really being able to, you knew that if you negotiated half of it or part of it, that may not get you where you wanted. Now, forgive me for being a little bit repetitive, but I'm going to tell a similar story from a slightly different perspective. And it's just a short story, but I think it helps us frame this just to a different level. And we're still going to talk about an orange. I've got my orange here. And we're going to talk about two kids sitting on a bench fighting over an orange. I want my orange. I want my orange. It's mine. It's mine. But there's only one orange, and they keep fighting over it. And an attorney walks by, and at this point, the one kid has that orange in her pocket. The attorney stops to ask what the problem is, and since they're struggling over it, yelling and screaming, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly. And the attorney says, well, she has the orange in her pocket. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and I say that the orange is her orange. I didn't say it was an accurate attorney. Okay, so forgive that. That's the way the story goes. Well, the attorney walks on, and the kids keep fighting over this orange. It gets out of the pocket, and they grab it back and forth. It's my orange. It's my orange. Well, a judge walks by, and the judge says, I've spent my entire career making fair decisions, and I think the fair thing to do is to cut that orange in half. And she tells this to the kids and keeps walking, and the kids keep grabbing at that orange. It's my orange. It's my orange. Well, luckily a mediator walked by. And a mediator stopped and quickly saw what the problem was as they struggled over it, and asked one of the kids, what is it that you want the orange for? The kid said, my brother's playing basketball down the street, and it's a hot day, and I have to have some orange, a nice big juicy orange, because I want to bring him a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice, and this is my only orange. Well, the mediator summarized, and then looked to the other kid and asked the other kid what the problem was and what they needed the orange for. And that kid said, well, it's my mother's birthday, and I want to make her a cake, and my recipe calls for the rind of one large orange, and this is my only orange. I won't go with the rest of the story. But what it does is this sets up, in a much simpler example, sort of the contrast between different approaches of dealing with the situation. And let's take that apart a little bit. What did the attorney use for solving the problem? The law, or what I'll call a rights-based approach. Who had the right to this orange? Whose right was it? Now, in that scenario, who would have been satisfied using a rights-based approach? The person with the orange, so one kid, right? All right. Then the judge came by, and what was the judge concerned with in terms of making a decision?
being fair.
Being fair. And given their decision about what was fair, who would have been satisfied with that situation?
Neither.
No one. Because half the orange got no one anywhere. Okay. So then the mediator came along, and the mediator took what we will call a needs or interest-based approach. And in that scenario, both kids got what they wanted. Now, I'm not going to say that every mediation will work out, that if you just figure out what people need, that's it. This is one strategy that's going to be important to you. This is going to be one approach that you're gonna need to use. But as you can see, negotiating over positions, it's mine, no, it's mine, gets you nowhere. No, it's mine. No, really, it's mine. I mean, there's nothing to negotiate, except maybe half the orange. Well, that didn't do anyone any good. Let me take it to a scenario where it's just a kind of basic situation that we often do at the center with two neighbors. And you've got one neighbor that's saying, get rid of your dog, okay? And you've got another neighbor that's saying, no, I'm keeping my dog. Now, what might a rights-based approach look at?
The local ordinances.
Yeah, the local ordinances or the laws regarding managing your property. Can you have a dog? Now, if you were going to do a compromise on this, you certainly don't want to cut the dog in half. Okay, but we maybe could talk about putting the dog in Aunt Sally's house Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and having the dog at home Tuesday, Thursday. That may or may not solve the problem. Let's take a look at a needs and interest-based approach. What do we want to know?
We want to know why. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Why number two? Or why number one doesn't like the dog?
Okay.
And what it is number two? For what reasons number two needs the dog?
Okay, good. Let's start with what number one's concern is about the dog. And let's just brainstorm a list. What could it be? You guys have all lived near people. Barking?
Picking up the guard.
Okay.
Biting.
Okay.
Allergy.
Okay.
Having to pick up after the dog.
No matter.
Okay, making a mess.
Kids are scared of it.
Scared kids? Scaring the cat? Or the dog? Or maybe not scaring the dog, maybe the opposite problem. Getting too cozy with the dog, huh? Your own dog.
Smelly.
Making puppies.
Brings fleas. Brings fleas.
Okay, this is a pretty good list. Now, would the same solution solve all these problems? I mean, now getting rid of the dog may solve all these problems, right, for neighbor number one. But if we lock ourselves into that, a lot of times this neighbor, and people come into conflict and they've thought so much about what their position is, what their demand is going to be, that they have forgot about why they had that demand in the first place. And what your job as the mediator is to dig below that position and try to find out what it is they're really going to accomplish. So question, neighbor Mr. Jones, what is it that is of concern about the dog? Okay, da-da-da. So what is it that you want to gain by getting rid of the dog? And let's answer, I don't have a different color pen,
I have a question.
There's a blue.
yes.
The concern might not really be the dog at all, but just something different that's been going on between them and the dog is just a scapegoat.
Yes, it could be. Definitely could be. And all that you can hope is that that comes up at some level, because you certainly can't assume necessarily that there's something else there if you haven't heard it. Let's assume in this scenario that is a dog issue. And I'm going to ask the question, now that I understand what the problem is, I'm going to ask the question, what is it that you hope to gain by getting rid of the dog? Now, if the problem is barking, what is it that you would hope to gain?
Quiet at night.
Now, there could be a couple of different things that you hope to gain. Maybe, is barking happening at night and you can't sleep, so you want quiet at night? Is it happening during the day so you can't work and you want to be able to work? Okay, so those could be two different things. It could be you want to get sleep, you want to get work, or let's just be general peace. All right. The dog is digging up the garden. What is it that you hope to gain?
Your vegetable crop.
Okay. You want to get your vegetables, or you don't want to waste money, or you want a nice garden. Let's just go through this personally on the other ones. Biting. The dog bites you. You want to feel safe, or you want your kids to be safe. If you have allergies, what is it you want to gain by getting rid of the dog?
Comfort.
Comfort, clean air, be able to breathe. The dog's making a mess on your lawn. Clean lawn. The dog's scaring the kids. Calm children, happy children. Scaring the cat. Calm cat, happy cat. Dog's making puppies with your dog. You don't want, so you want to gain a healthier dog, or you don't want to, you want to gain not having to spend money or not having to deal with the puppies. And it's bringing fleas. Clean home or clean yard. Now, once I understand those things as a mediator, I know more what the problem is, and I know what the person wants to accomplish. Then we can begin to think about other ways to accomplish that. So, Mr. Jones, what you're saying is that the dog is causing problems by barking, and you're not able to sleep at night. So what you're really looking for, it sounds like, is to be able to get a solid night's sleep without being disturbed by the dog. And getting rid of the dog may be one way to do that. What other ideas do you have about how you can get some sleep? Both of you, what ideas do you have about how Mr. Jones could get some sleep? And just, let's brainstorm again. What might that be?
Earbuds.
Earplugs.
Oh, well, I don't know if this is done, you could make the dog be inside or when he barks.
Put the dog inside. Muzzle the dog. Maybe put the dog on another side of the yard. Maybe it's a really big yard and the doghouse is right underneath your window. Put the dog in the basement. And let's say that what you were trying to gain was, your vegetables and not wasting money on your garden. What other ways, Mr. Jones and Mr. Smith, could we accomplish that besides getting rid of the dog?
Build a fence.
Build a fence, or repair the fence, or keep the dog on a leash. Put another fence, a different kind of fence, different kind of gate. I think that if we look at this position or this demand as simply one way to get there, it starts opening things up. And how much more creative could we get? But if we limit it to this, get rid of dog, keep dog, get rid of dog, keep dog, that's simply a ping pong match. And it's real hard for that negotiation to happen. Additionally, once we know Mr. Jones wants to get his sleep, but he's convinced that getting rid of the dog is the only way to get that, we can explore what's it going to take for you to get rid of the dog. Well, I'm going to have to go to court, I'm going to get these ordinances. Well, what's that going to do for you getting sleep? What are you going to do in the meantime about getting sleep? Let's say you do go to court and he gets a citation. How will that get you your sleep? It begins to focus on underlying needs of these parties. That's the goal here. Questions about this? We kind of went at it in a couple different ways. The more businessy negotiation, the simple kids on the bench, as well as seeing it played out with these two neighbors. Another thing about needs and interests when it comes to money, a lot of times people assume that the dollar amount is, when people present a position of I want $100, I want $1,000, that simply stands for a financial need. There are other needs behind people making demands for money. We didn't explore those too much today because there was a lot of the friendship, emotional stuff that we were digging into. What else might a demand for money represent in terms of an underlying interest? Recognition of responsibility, sometimes I hear.
The need, whatever they need the money for.
Okay, they may demand $5,000 because they want to buy a new car because of this problem, but what they really need may be a way to get to work. They may need a new car, and sometimes I've seen and I've heard about rather in an employment discrimination mediation. One of the main financial needs for a person is they haven't been able to purchase a new car, they lost their job, this is a problem. And the company is refusing to make a cash settlement, but other things that are important they may be able to do, the company car or other benefits. So even when you have money, it can be important if you're not understanding what that money means to explore underneath that. And if a person says, I want $5,000, and the reason they want that is because I want this other person to demonstrate some responsibility for that, well, that may show some flexibility over time. you know, a person may feel responsibility is being met even when the payment schedule is being met, even if the money doesn't come all at once. Now, if it's a financial need, I need this money because if this bill does not get paid by the end of the month, I'm in trouble. Well, if what we're talking about is at the end of the month, an immediate financial need, what does it mean to walk away from this offer and go back to court? If you're going to have trouble paying this bill, and some money's on the table now, so that can be a need for time around that money. Okay? Something that's come up is sometimes in a mediation, people hear the word need attached with a statement, and they think they've got the need. I need for Mr. Smith to get rid of his dog. Okay? So just because the word need is there doesn't mean you've got it. Think of it as underlying motivation, underlying interest, and know that there's a couple different levels of that. It may be sleep, and sleep may be affecting another level of their life. If they don't get sleep at night, they can't do their job. So there's multi-levels here, and that's part of this whole process. Okay, I'll ask Jen, any more questions about needs and interests?
Are there certain questions that you can use? I mean, I think of why. Why is it that you feel you need them to get rid of the dog? But are there other trigger questions that you use?
This is gonna transition me into the questioning exercise, so this is great. I think we started here with what is your concern about the dog, what is your problem about the dog, and what do you want to gain by getting rid of the dog? That often focuses people on goals. What do you want to gain by getting rid of the dog? I do that a lot with, I wanted to go to jail. Well, what do you hope to accomplish by sending him to jail? Tell me what that's going to do for you. I want to know that. And let's go into a questioning exercise now. Let's see, we've got an odd number now. So I'm going to make this group be a group of 3, and then I want you to pair off with your neighbor here. I'm going to pair here, 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 and here. Now, I want one person to be a stater, to make a statement. And this statement can be anything political, arts, entertainment, personal, It was a real, I loved the movie Forrest Gump. I hated the movie Forrest Gump. Mayor Daley is the best mayor to rule Chicago. Mayor Daley is the worst mayor to rule Chicago. Say something emphatic, so there's something to ask about there. So we've got the stater. Then your other person is the questioner. And in this exercise, the questioner can only ask questions that begin with why. Why do you think Mayor Daley's the greatest mayor to whatever? Why do you think he isn't? He's the worst mayor, okay? So in the triad group, I'm going to have 1 or 2 of you be questioners and 1 of you be a stater, okay? And I know that the topics will start to get interesting, but I'm going to cut you off at some point and come back and talk about that, how that questioning dynamic works. So, yes?
You're saying that for example, I should come up with a question, my colleague would, a statement, my colleague would respond to the question, then I come up with another statement, she responds to that.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. No, you say, she would come up with a question and you would respond to the question, and on the same topic, keep asking questions. So if you choose to talk about Forrest Gump, why did you think Forrest Gump was a great movie? Well, I thought Tom Hanks' performance was brilliant. Why did you think Tom Hanks' performance, or why did you like the performance? Now, that means as the stater, when you're giving your answer, it doesn't get to be a monologue. Well, let me tell you, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. You still want to give them some room to practice asking questions. Okay, so just feel what this feels like to put on for a few minutes, and then I'll call you back to the group and we'll switch and do some other questioning.
Which two?
You're the stater.
One's a stater and one's a questioner.
What would you prefer?
Questioners felt limited. Did anyone feel like they kind of felt like they might be cross-examining a little bit?
It was uncomfortable to ask why questions.
Yeah. Now, when we're talking about sports or movies with people we're friendly with, that may not quite be as prevalent, but we're hearing from the group a little sense of that defensiveness that can be built in with that why question. And I want to talk more about that. But, and now Brett's going to wonder why on earth I made him jump up there and turn the camera on, because now I'm going to put you back into another exercise. I want you to stay in your same groups, and you can switch, but now you can only ask what and how questions. So why don't you switch? The other side can make a statement of some sort of emphatic nature, and if you're just real interested in keeping, I think we're talking about the goals over here, I'm not sure. If you want to keep on the same topic, that's fine, but only what and how questions. Questions that start with what and how. So let's go do that for a few minutes. So I'll okay, how do things feel differently with this?
Much better.
Better or how?
Well,
Why?
there were, it was possible for more variety of questions and to go in different directions and then come back to different issues.
And you weren't putting the person on the spot so much. The why is like in your opinion. It seems like they have to justify what they said.
And
You get more information.
You get more information. You know, sometimes I do this, and it's real interesting. You do the same exercise with the group over and over, and I've had people tell me, oh, well, why seems so much more natural and what and how it feels. But you guys did what I wanted you to do, so thank you. I mean, most of the time when we do this with groups, people will say that the whys make them feel a little defensive, because inherently why is asking you to justify something. Why do you want to get rid of the dog, Mr. Jones? In general of the response, because he's a filthy, mangy mutt and he needs to leave. Now, asking what or how question, how has the dog been disruptive? What are your concerns about the dog? What exactly has the dog done? How has the dog upset you or affected you? Those are asking for specific pieces of information rather than a justification. Now, I find, and I don't know if anyone found this, that those what and how questions can be a little bit trickier to construct. I mean, because if you're just asking a why question, you can just add why onto the last thing that they said. Why do you want to get rid of the dog? So they're a little bit easier to ask than the what and how, because I feel, and I don't know if anyone else felt this, that when you ask a what and how, you have to think, what information is it that I want? What do I really want to know about this? What do I want to know about this dog? So constructing those questions can be more difficult. Now, I do not mean to suggest that you will never ask a why question in mediation, because we ask a lot of why questions naturally. But what you want to be focused on is asking effective questions. And if you are aware that why questions can make people a little defensive, and that a why question may not get the information that you want, you can make sure to try and mix those up and to focus on asking more what and how questions. Okay. But I'm not saying eliminate why questions from your vocabulary, but with this knowledge, go into a mediation focusing more on those what and hows. And try that in other scenarios as well. When you're asking someone, you know, why, let's go to this restaurant. Well, why do you want to go there? It can engender some defense. You know, what made you think of that restaurant? Or how did you decide to go there? Or what about that restaurant is interesting to you? What have you heard about that restaurant? You know, it really is focusing the discussion more on the issue than on a defense or on that cross-examination. Because now think about it in mediation. You're talking about movies, sports, maybe a little friendly politics, but think about people who are in conflict and they don't know you. And you're talking about something they've gotten very upset about. That why could really send the escalation up even higher. Now, that's one level of questioning, whys versus what and hows. Another kind of questioning and different kinds of questions we talk about, and it's probably a common understanding, but it's open versus closed-ended questions. And I think Brad touched on this earlier in initial statements, is the kinds of different questions you can ask to maybe focus people in, or draw them out. So open-ended questions, you know, tell me more, what happened next? How did that situation make you feel? What's the nature of your relationship? These are questions that are going to draw people out. Whereas a closed-ended question, what might be some closed questions?
Would you ever say, be specific? Is that judgment?
I guess I would do it, like, rather than say, be specific, I might say, could you be a little more specific? I'm not quite clear yet. And if you know exactly what you want to be specific on, you know, what model is your car? How big is your car? So now, a lot of times people answer that they think closed questions are yes or no questions. That's a kind of closed question, but not all closed questions are yes or no. You know, do you live together, yes or no? How long have you lived together? 7, 8, 2 years. That's still a closed question. Generally, in mediation, I would focus more on asking open questions than closed questions. There will be appropriate opportunities for closed questions when you need specific details, when you have a party who is all over the map and you're trying to narrow them in. What day did this happen on? How many weeks transpired before the next event? And if you're trying to focus them in. But when you ask a very closed question, it means you limit the opportunity for information to come out from the experts, who are the parties. For example, if I have a landlord-tenant situation, we're dealing with a security deposit which hasn't been repaid, and I ask the question, and there's a dispute over no damage was caused, no it wasn't, blah, blah, blah. Do you do a walkthrough when a tenant leaves? What's the possible answers to that? Yes or no? Well, an open question would be, what kinds of procedures do you have when a tenant leaves? What is your usual routine when a tenant leaves? Tell me about things that you do when a tenant is moving out. What you will discover from that is going to be, well, first they contact me and then I do a walkthrough, or, well, there's no routine. I don't know, they just leave and then I look at the apartment. Right? Well, how do you evaluate the apartment? Rather than, do you first look for damage or do you paint it? Yes, no. So the parties are the experts at the table. If you open a question up, you get the opportunity for more information to come out. I find that if people have a legal background, that they've been kind of trained out of this very broad, well, there could be lots of answers to this question. There could be a lot of different ways to approach this answer. So that's going to be a struggle that you'll work with. And I personally, as a trainer, will be in your simulation and say, make it an open question. And you'll get a chance to practice with that. But if you go in your simulations and you look for that, where are closed questions, how could I turn them to be open, and what would be the difference in the kind of information that we got? That's going to really help you get more information on that table and understand the parties more. Okay, so we've got two levels, what versus why and how, open versus closed. The third is simply asking a lot of questions. If you have a statement coming out of your mouth, turn it into a question. If you ask a lot of questions, it means that this mediation is always, the ownership of it is always put back on the parties. Does this list seem to cover the issues that we need to talk about? What is important to you? Have I heard you say that this is what you want to do? Is there anything else? Is there anything that you want confidential? Anything else that you think needs to be in this agreement? Does this cover what we talked about? You're always putting it back on the parties. When I summarize in the initial statements, I always say, do I seem to have it right? Is there anything I've missed? Now, I know these are closed questions, but we're talking about procedural things. So if you ask a lot of questions, it means you're always putting back on the parties the responsibility for, that they're letting you know what's important to them, that you understand it right, and you're not going through with assumptions. The other thing about always asking a question is people sometimes have a tendency to put these sort of statement questions. Don't you think it would have been better if you would have tried talking to her first? Now, is that a question or is that a statement? I think it has a question mark at the end, but there's a lot of assumptions built into that question. Can't you see it from her perspective? Shouldn't you have done this first? So questions are good, but let's work on the kind of structure of these questions. Okay. Questions? All right. I'm going to give you just a quick, 5-minute stretch break, run to the bathroom, and my watch says it's like 25 after, and that may be a little bit fast, and so we'll just get started maybe a little bit before 4:30, so just a quick stretch break for that process. But I know that it's hard to keep going. That's why they put me on in the end, because I sort of get real hyper. But so what did I do there? I just acknowledged a few things and I also stroked a little bit, you know, you keep hanging in there. So you can use these in a lot of settings. One of the things that questioning leads into is reality testing. So I want to begin to touch on reality testing. Now, we're not worried about what your concern of the reality is. The only reality we have to worry about is the party's reality. So you don't need to put any kind of objective standard on whether this is realistic or not, but you want to help the parties trigger the thought process that will help them evaluate if this situation is realistic. Now, what do I mean by situation? There's a couple of things. To evaluate whether this agreement that they're writing is realistic. They've had a very amicable mediation, everyone wants to move towards resolution, and you have an agreement, and you want to make sure that before we sign this agreement that it's going to work. And I tell you, it is very tempting when everyone's, oh yeah, sure, I'll pay that $5,000. Okay, great, I'll take that $5,000. To just want to write that down and get them out of there before any more discussion happens and this agreement breaks down. But, and part of your duty, your ethical duty, is to create an agreement which is not necessarily a good agreement or a fair agreement or the best agreement, but is at least reasonably viable. Okay, and John's going to talk more about those ethical duties later on. But let's talk about how we do some checking out on whether or not this is reasonably viable. Now let's say you have two parties in a room, and one is demanding a whole bunch of money, over $5,000, from a person, let's say that person's me, who has had difficulty over the last 12 months paying all of their rent. Every month, rent is late. If they get rent at all, it's partial payment, not even half payment. And we're at the end of a year of that, and landlord has demanded, $5,000 in back rent. There's some negotiation. Landlord goes down to $4,000. And I, as tenant, say, fine, I'll pay it. Landlord says, well, the deal only stands if I get it tomorrow morning. Fine, I will pay $4,000 to you tomorrow morning. What's going through your head? Just honestly, not as mediators.
She's
All
not
right?
gonna do it.
Now, we're not judging. Now, I mean, some of you will have different realities. For me personally, $4,000 tomorrow morning would be a little tricky. For some people, $4,000 tomorrow morning is not that big of a deal. Now, you're not judging, is this a big deal for me or not, but what you've heard about this person is that it may be a big deal for them. So you want to ask some questions, not to tell them that they're being unrealistic, but to trigger the thought process, which is going to help them evaluate, is this a reality for them? So let's just, as a group, throw out some questions that you may want to ask that person. And let's say it's in caucus, so you have some privacy.
Where are you gonna get the money from?
I was thinking about getting the loan.
Well, it's 6 o'clock right now.
Oh no, it's 4:35 and my bank closes at 5.
That's it.
Okay.
You're crazy.
Remember, we're trying to trigger a thought process here.
Is this something that you think is possible in the next half hour?
Yes.
Why? How is it that
What?
you think it's possible?
How is it that I think it's possible? Well, because the people at my bank have always been so friendly in the past, and they have all those ads about quick approval loans and everything.
I'm just thinking about how much trouble there's been in the past with getting these rents paid on time, and I'm wondering if there might be any difficulty again this time.
No, I don't think there will be. Let's try some open questions here. I'm toying with you a little bit, so.
Have you ever tried this process before?
No.
Do you
How do
have
you-
any established credit now?
I have a checking account.
What are the possible problems that might stand in your way of making this payment?
That's a good idea.
Well, I mean, I have to get the loan, and I don't really know how long a loan takes.
Are there any other alternatives that you can think of besides getting a loan? Because we don't know that.
Yeah, well, I guess there really aren't any. Okay, let me stop in here for a second, because I'm sort of throwing out some things. There were some great questions out there. Let me throw out a couple more questions. Tell me what the process is for getting a loan. Okay. Now, the difference between that is, do you know what's involved with getting a loan? Now, you could start with, do you know what's involved with getting a loan? Yes or no? Well, if you get yes, well, tell me what are the steps involved with getting a loan? Because what is that doing? It's triggering the thought process. Well, first, I have to do this, then I have to do that. Or I could tell you, I guess I don't really know. Okay. Well, next question. How has your financial situation changed? Since, I've heard before that paying these rents has been difficult. How has your financial situation changed so that you feel that you can accomplish this by tomorrow morning? Not has your financial situation changed, which would be a fine question, but I'm just showing you how has your financial situation changed? I could say, well, Grandma died and I got a $10,000 money order sitting in the bank and I'm willing to pay off my debt because of this, which I didn't say. Another question may be, how confident are you that you're going to be able to get this loan before tomorrow morning?
Very.
Very confident. And what factors, what information do you have that makes you feel confident? Now, and then the other question is, okay, I understand you feel that this is something that's very possible. If you aren't able to get it tomorrow morning, what are the ramifications of that? Okay, and we're stepping a little bit beyond reality testing to some extent by is this realistic and checking out what are the effects of this. Now, your goal is not to persuade me or to convince me, but to get me thinking through, which I think a lot of those good questions have done. Now, you're hearing a lot of I don't know, I'm not sure, and you're thinking, well, now what if I've asked all these questions and she's clueless? Then you're stepping into a different strategy, which may be, Margaret, I'm hearing that this is agreement that you really want to do, but I'm also hearing a lot of information that you're not sure about. And then we've explored a little bit what's the effect of not meeting this agreement. Then I might switch into explaining, what we're going to do here today if we do reach an agreement is write it up and sign it, and everyone needs to commit to something that they really feel that they can do. I'm hearing a lot of unsureness about this process, how, and exploring that, and that goes a little bit beyond reality. Let's try the same character, and let's ask the questions again and see where it goes if I give you some different answers. Yeah, I'll get the $4,000 to him by tomorrow morning.
How are you going to obtain the money?
Well, I know I've been not paying my rent for the last year, but my great uncle Martha died last week, and just yesterday I got a check for $20,000. So what I'd really like to do is pay off this debt. People feel like this might be somewhat viable for me?
Well,
Okay.
Margaret, this is new information, and I was gonna say, why are we in this process? If you've got $20,000, why are we sitting here talking?
Well, it was just last week. The papers were filed 3 weeks ago, so.
But do you know that you will have access to that money tomorrow?
Yeah, I deposited in a bank account yesterday. And there may be some questions about how much money can you take out at once and all of that, what kind of form the money's going to be in. So you're touching on still some good details. So I just show your job is not to find proof. Like you don't, well, can I see the copy of that check or can I see the bank statement? You're not there to make sure you've got that absolutely 100%, no doubts about it agreement. But is this somewhat viable and do I get the sense from this party that it is?
And this may be a segue into the next topic, but what do we do when you will not face reality and you still want to enter into the agreement, but your judgment, and I found myself in a sense of something that I had to hold back, that I wanted to get you into a position where you saw reality.
There's some fine lines there, and I think that more often than not, your reality testing is going to be on the other side of it. People who want to leave the table and think that's going to be a better answer for them. So, but there is a fine line. I mean, ultimately, if you feel that a person has no intention of following through on an agreement, then there's some ethical issues with drawing up that agreement and being, as a mediator, participating in completing that agreement. Now, a party's going to have to go pretty far to convince me that there is no way that they can do that. And while that's not my judgment to tell them, at the same time, I don't want to participate in an agreement that I am almost positive a person has no intention of following through on. And there's a difference between maybe being a little bit clueless, you know, and really just having no intention of doing that. And a person who says they're going to be able, they have no money, absolutely, and they think they can get a loan by 6 p.m. tonight, you know, that may be where we're closing that line. That's a little unrealistic, just it's exaggerated or exercise. What you're more likely to have, you know, is someone who has been having a little less trouble and can come up with, you know, the equivalent of 2 months' rent at once. And they're like, well, you know, my mother owes some money. She said she'd be paying back to me, and I'm also going to get paid next week, and it's going to be tight, but I think I can do it. Well, what might be some things that can come up in that time? You know, when would your next paycheck be? What are the effects of having to pay too much rent at once going to be? And if the person's like, well, it's going to be difficult, but, you know, I just paid off that bill, and I think I can hold off on that bill because I've been good on that so far, so I shouldn't have any problems if I hold off on that bill. And so, you know, I think I can pull it off because I really want to get up to speed on this rent. You know, you have some doubts maybe that it's going to work, right? You know, there's some factors there, but at the same time, you've seen the person has thought it through. Not that they have the proof in writing, not that it's 100% convinced, but they've thought it through. Now, let's move away from that money issue. Let's talk about something like two people, like Andy and I today. If we would have agreed never to speak or see each other ever again, what might you want to reality test us on?
How easy it would be for you not to see each other.
Good? What, how often?
Friends, how easy this would be possible.
Yeah, you're often, I hear before you're often in the same situations. What will you do?
Right.
What will you do the next time you're in a similar setting?
I hear that you have friends in common, so what will happen if you meet those friends in common and he's there?
Right, and it's not just pointing those things out. What these questions are doing is making me or Andy say, well, this is what I think would happen. Okay. But like I was talking with someone, I may say, well, actually, Andy, I haven't told you or anyone, but I've decided to move to California, and so I really just don't even want to have this discussion. And, you know, there's a few people I want to keep in touch with, but other than that, I don't plan to hang around anymore. Well, that agreement of them not seeing each other or talking to each other anymore may work, and you've gotten a sense of that. What I'm going to do is just pass out a sheet of reality testing that discusses some of the things that we went over here, and I wanted to get you to think about it before I pass out this sheet here. Another scenario when you do reality testing is not around, whoops, sorry, it's not around agreements, but quite the opposite. A person believing a position or a demand that they're making is not going to be a problem. For example, I'm convinced that the judge will see it my way, so there's no point in me negotiating. The judge is going to see it my way. Why don't you, and I do the pair up again, I know but it kind of keeps us a little bit more awake. Just do the pair up just for a couple of minutes and have one person be the mediator trying to reality test the statement, the judge will see it my way. Okay? And another person answer questions to that. Okay? So just for a few minutes, we'll just pair up. And I just wanted to put the burden on you for a second to all having to think of some of those questions. What were some questions that people asked?
Yeah. What was the question?
What were some of the questions that people were using?
Marta was very adamant. She said the judge will see it my way. If he's worth anything, he'll see it my way.
Yeah, it was pretty obnoxious.
Yeah. So I just had to
Comment?
say, well, let's look at your worst scenario, Margaret, that this particular judge would say, Joe's right. How would you feel? What would you do?
Okay.
I did a slightly different. I said, I thought I was gonna say it was a little bit different. I said, she told me, well, I'm gonna win because my evidence is so great, and I said, well, worst case scenario, what could the other side come up with in the way of evidence that would count against you that could threaten that?
Those are some good questions.
Yeah, these guys asked me what indication did I have that the judge would see the case my way.
Did anyone ask, have you been before this judge before?
Yes, she did.
You've been to this court before? Have you seen, in a lot of cases that I do, people have sat in the courtroom in the morning and now they're going to mediate and going out. And so I have this wonderful tool of having had them see some of what happened in the morning. So I can ask, well, what did you see the judge doing in the morning? What did he ask for? What did he decide on? Any other questions, like how long?
The length of the process.
Yeah, how long would this take? What we started to touch on is something that's sort of reality testing's brother, or sister, which is BATNA. Best alternative to the negotiated agreement. And that's where I think that BATNA and reality testing are related, and you use reality testing to get at the BATNA. Jan?
Well, we were wondering, the question was, what do you think some of your options might be if the judge doesn't agree with you? Is that getting into that, or is that inappropriate?
Well, you know, one of the wonderful things about mediating is you're never doing one thing at a time. I mean, if you're mediating well, you're doing a lot of things at once. You're actively listening while you're reality testing, while you're exploring underlying needs and generating options. So I think it's almost a little bit artificial for me to say just do some reality testing here.
No, but I mean, is that an inappropriate question to actually say to the person, have you thought of what your other options would be?
I think though, and let's talk about timing of reality testing, because oftentimes before you get to reality testing, you've explored other options. When a person says, well, I'm sure the judge will see it my way, before you maybe go for that, well, what convinces you of that? You know, have you seen this judge before? What's going to be involved with getting the judge to see it your way? Earlier on in the process, and I can't remember exactly, Brad, how you outline it, there's that exploring options and getting information stage. And so earlier on in the process, if someone says first thing in crosstalk, you know, this is really ridiculous because anyway the judge is going to see it my way, I'm going to set that aside for now. And well, okay, you know, obviously you're convinced of that, and that's fine. We can talk more about that later. But can you just tell me a little bit more about what your concern is and what it is that you're trying to accomplish and what your hope is about this and what upsets you here? And then go for some other options. The timing around reality testing is not something that you do very early on in the process. You're not going to be doing it in initial statements, and you're not going to be doing it, for the most part, in a first crosstalk. A lot of this is stuff that's probably going to be done in a caucus. If you think about what reality, on this topic, in terms of people's demands or positions or assumptions, if you're dealing with agreement writing, if, for example, Andy and I would have agreed today to never see each other again, some of that reality testing had to happen with both of us there because we were about to both agree to this, so we both needed to do that. But a money issue that's definitely on one side, caucus is a better place to do that. In people's demands or assumptions, I'm holding off on really reality testing those. I'm exploring in other ways. I'm using my other techniques of questioning and reframing, which we're going to talk about, and translating positions into needs and interests. And then, after I feel I've got a sense of the situation, I'm going to try and trigger some thought processes to shake up some of these assumptions and see where they're at. So I think that in that scenario, some of those things would have happened before you would have gotten to reality testing. But let's talk a little bit about BATNA, because you're using a lot of reality testing questions to get to BATNA. And BATNA stands for Best Alternative to the Negotiated Agreement. Take away that B and just think of it as ATNA, alternative to the negotiated agreement. Because a lot of you did a worst case, a best case. And the most important thing about that is that when a party is getting ready to leave the table, or before the negotiation entrenches, it's essential that they understand what is the alternative to this negotiation. Whether that's court or continued negotiation or even just an unresolved situation, what is that going to mean for them? So a lot of these reality testing questions we've been asking are going to get at the BATNA. You know, if you don't resolve it here today, what's that going to mean for you? I'm going to go to court. What's going to be involved with that? How long is that going to take? What costs are involved with that? How will that get you what you're looking for? Best case scenario, worst case scenario. Now let's talk a little bit about timing around BATNA. It's definitely not something I do up front when someone says, well, you know, unless I get this, I'm going back to court. Okay, well, let's talk about court. What's the alternative here? You know, I want to do this later on in the mediation. Probably going to do it in caucus. And I want to do it in a way that doesn't challenge people. I don't want to say, well, let's talk about, you know, what the alternatives are, because I think you really need to look at what's on the table here, or you need to come up with something better. So very gently, actually, well, after I've got a person to generate a few ideas, you know, you've thought of a couple different ways to approach this problem. And these are things that we can bring back when we come back from caucus. But let's take a second to look at what may happen if there isn't an agreement today. What's involved with that? What's going to be the result? Sometimes people will look at the BATNA and feel that what they have outside of this negotiation is better than what they can get inside. And that's going to compel them to leave. Had scenarios where safety has been such an issue that a person had been at the table to negotiate keeping apart with a person they were fearful of and had seen that break down before. And the only thing they knew was going to work, or the only chance that they had, was the restraining order. That they had seen written agreements and verbal agreements fall apart before. And for them, their BATNA was the only alternative. What they had at the table, what they could get at the table, was not as good as they could risk getting somewhere else. So that made them leave the table. I mean, they weren't interested in staying in that negotiation. Sometimes comparing what's outside of that negotiation to what you can get here will re-engage a person. And let's talk about this in the simplest money terms. Person wants $700, and there's $500 on the table, but that's not enough. And you look at the BATNA, time, cost, expense, collection, what's going to happen when you get a judgment? How is that going to affect the relationship that you have? How is that going to affect the way you do business in the future? Taking a look at that makes them feel, oh, $500 compared with this may be better than I thought. So it gives a person a chance to weigh that perspective. There were some questions? A thing about reality testing and BATNA, you don't always see it work. Sometimes a person is thinking they don't have any ideas except this one idea. They're pretty much walking out the door, but they're willing to stay a little bit longer. You do some reality testing, you do some BATNA. You don't see parties go, you know, now that I think about it, it really is probably much better for me to stay in this mediation because all those things outside of this process are going to take a lot more time and energy than I realized. So I'm going to come up with 6 more ideas. You don't see that light bulb go off. You see it happen slowly, which is why I kind of have an analogy of playing a deck of cards as the mediator. You have all these different things that you can do. You may try reality testing for a while, stop doing that, go to another thing, and come back to some options generating later on. And all of a sudden, that option generating works a little bit better. That discussion around what else we could do works a little bit better because 10 minutes ago, some reality testing made them think. It triggered a thought process. So in terms of strategies, because this is a hard strategy to do, you know, and keep that rapport and not challenge people. So in terms of strategies, you don't want to drive so hard that you're pushing the person away. So don't feel like you have to go for it until you see this change, this transformation. And know that a lot of things you do will be transforming this process later on beyond when you won't really know which thing you did made the person feel that they could get to a different place. Yes?
If you're in that, if you're in that situation where one of the parties decides that they've had it at that particular point and they get up to leave, what's the technique that you use? Do you go to caucus with that person?
Get up to leave.
The person actually gets up and starts to leave, and how do you get to them to do the reality testing or whatever, do you go to a caucus situation then?
Well, it depends when it happens. Like if it happens in initial statements, I may try and say, you know, like let's say the respondent doesn't, I know it's hard to listen to the initiator. Would you be willing to just wait 10 more minutes so I can hear from each of you? If it's very early on in the process, I may ask, could they engage a little bit longer? But going to caucus before someone just gets out and leaves is always an option. Now, if I've been in that mediation for 3.5 hours and we've been talking about the same 2 ideas and nothing else has come out on the table, there may be messages that parties are, they're not willing to move anymore. And as far as they see it, this process is over. And I want to recognize that before people necessarily are bolting out the door. So what I may do is, okay, you know, I hear you saying that you don't have any more to discuss. Let me just bring this to closure a little bit and close this off. Because there are some pieces of closure. You know, you want to tear up your notes. We often, people will have some sort of evaluation that they need to fill out. You want to talk about the next step, if it is a court process, and letting each of them know. You want them to feel that you have control at the end of that process, even if you are ending without an agreement. So I would try to engage people at least to that point. So, I mean, not resolving the situation is not necessarily, I mean, that may often happen in an agreement, and you want to recognize that as well.
Well, I'm just thinking of my own personal experience in some of these cases. People almost leave it a lunch. I mean, I realize you want closure. I realize you want to end it that way if you can. But they need to go off by themselves and think about what the future court costs are going to be, or come to an agreement, or see the light. You know, off having a dinner break or a lunch break or the next thing or something like that seems to work. It's almost like they start resisting more if we're almost there and they're standing.
There's a lot of reasons why people will hold on to conflict that have nothing to do with what you can or can't do.
Right, and they just can go home and rethink it or talk to somebody else close to them or something, they come back and make different.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a context where a second session is a possibility, and probably the more complex matters you're dealing with, you know, there's a lot more to process, and the second session may be really helpful. We found that when we schedule second sessions, people don't come back.
Oh.
So if we schedule a second session just because people weren't quite there yet, they don't come back. If we schedule a second session because we didn't have all the information, like now we realize that we don't know about the estimates, or someone wanted to see something or do something to get information that may help, then we have a little bit more luck. But if it's just because people aren't there, it doesn't work for us.
On that, now you mentioned that it frequently is gone into in caucus. Does it ever work to have people do it confronting each other so that I can realize that you think you're going to get 60 million and you realize that I think you're going to get 0? Or
yes, I think it does work well in the second half of the mediation joint session. So the first time I would introduce it would be in caucus. Later on in the mediation, like if you hear you're getting to a point where parties have stopped coming up with any ideas and we're not resolving it, asking what's the next step for each of you, what's the best thing you can happen, what's the best thing you can happen, can do that. And you could say, well, so each of you hope that you'll be able to win in court. Is that possible for it to happen to both of you at the same time? No. Okay, and try to do that. What I want to discourage you from doing is, a lot of time it's a strategy that people go to the first time they hear this, I'm going to win, or I want 60 million or nothing. It's a strategy that's a little bit later in the mediation. It's important to do and important to explore, but you want to build some of that trust and rapport and make sure you understand the situation first. I have asked Brad to let me finish just a little bit early. So I'm going to do just one more quick strategy with you, and then we'll finish up. So if I know that you're all dying out there, but let me just do one more thing, and this is on neutralizing language. We talked a little bit about neutrality and what you do, and we talked about some of the language in neutrality. And I want to just do a quick exercise here. Taking things that are inflammatory and hostile, and obviously not neutral, and putting them in a context where people can hear it a little bit better. Now, awkwardness of doing these exercises in isolation because it's a little bit manufactured. So in this scenario, in this worksheet here, I have a statement, okay, an inflammatory statement. Now, we don't get to see the whole mediation around it, but what I want you to do is assume that this is something that's said, for example, in an initial statement. So you've got to restate it or summarize it, because this is not just something that's said as a dig at someone. This is the issue. Obviously, they're digging at someone, but I'm saying it's not just, sometimes people will say the problem is, you know, the money and the friendship. Oh, and by the way, you know, he also owes me $5 for the movie or something like that. You know, this is the essential thing that people want you to know about for this mediation. So what we want to work about is how to restate that or summarize that so that we can let the party who said this know we heard them without buying into some of this really unneutral language. So take a look at the first couple and see if you can come up with some ideas about that, and then we'll talk about it.
Only the first two?
Yeah, because I want to do them together, but just do the first two on your own. Disgusting, trashy disgrace.
Her house is not in the best of conditions.
Okay.
Disarray.
Her house is in disarray.
So you don't like the way she keeps her house?
You don't like the way
You're unhappy with the condition of the house?
you're unhappy with the condition of the house.
You don't think that the house meets the zone boundaries?
Okay.
Did you feel uncomfortable in your house?
You feel uncomfortable in her house. Now, what's a lot of you may be struggling with is you want to ask questions and you want to know more about that. And I recognize that this doesn't quite give you all the information that you want. I think that the ones that we had about you don't like the way she keeps her house, what was yours?
Unhappy with the condition of your house?
You're unhappy with the condition of her house?
Oh, I just had a concern about appearing to validate.
Well, I understand from what you're saying, Dave. I mean, that's-
Okay. Well, we have some different things. Like, you feel her house is a little untidy. We didn't have that exactly. But what that does is it tries to lessen the impact of the inflammatory words by making it nicer. But what can happen is the person, I'm like, no, it's not untidy. We're talking trash 6 feet high on the lawn. We're talking spaghetti on the walls. We're talking overflowing garbage cans. I'm talking trashy. And you have the other person who, no, it's really not untidy. So you've got to watch those judgment words. And so the things like, okay, you don't like the way she keeps her house.